At 14:07 local time, F/A-18 Super Hornets were screaming toward these three irreplaceable Iranian aircraft at Kerman Airport. Overhead, a circling drone was relaying footage back to the strike group, and what it saw wasn't good. The Iranians were getting ready to put these birds in the air at any moment, and just as the F-18s punched it to full afterburner, an Iranian operator popped out looking to put their faces on a t-shirt. Both F/A-18 pilots, call signs Raven 1 and Raven 2, had swung wide east through Baluchistan to avoid everything. The desert didn't cooperate. Raven 1's AN/ALR-67, the radar warning receiver that tells a pilot who's hunting you and how seriously, lit up with a tone every fighter pilot memorizes and never wants to hear. Phased array acquisition at fast pulse repetition. A Tor M1 battery inside 12 kilometers. The battery had been sitting cold in the foothills with its radar off, the missile defense equivalent of a bouncer sitting in a dark corner of a club, arms crossed, watching the door. No small talk, no warning look across the room. The instant the Super Hornets crossed the horizon, it skipped the search phase entirely and went straight to fire control. No "who are you?" No "can I see some ID?" Just a fist already in the air before you'd finished walking through the door. Raven 1's hands were already moving, left to the chaff switch, right tightening on the stick. Think of the Tor's missile as a telephone pole doing Mach 2.8 that pulls 28 Gs in the terminal phase, roughly 4 times what the pilot can sustain before the lights go out. The phased array hops frequencies faster than most jammers can follow, like trying to talk to someone who changes languages mid-syllable. The surviving crews had learned exactly one trick in 11 days of war: fire once, shut down, and run as fast as you can before the Americans can shoot back. Raven 1 hauled the stick into his lap and pulled 6 Gs. The horizon whipped vertical and the desert floor filled his canopy. Behind him, ALE-47 dispensers cycled chaff, aluminum-coated fibers blooming into a radar ghost the same size as the jet. The ALQ-214 jammer pumped false range data into the tracking frequency. It pointed the missile at empty air 500 meters behind the aircraft. Raven 2 broke the opposite direction, splitting the formation and forcing the battery crew to pick one target. They picked Raven 1. The chaff and the jammer's false data corrupted the tracking solution, while 6 Gs of geometry shift moved the jet clean out of the seeker's prediction cone. Warhead detonated behind and below. Shrapnel distance? No impact, but close enough to tickle the airframe and ruin your flight suit. Inside the Tor M1, the battery commander slammed the master switch and the scope went dark. The driver was already engaging tracks beneath them. 2 weeks ago, the commander would have fired again. But 11 days of watching America turn Iran into a parking lot gave him second thoughts. But the Tor didn't need a hit. It needed 45 seconds. The 6G break threw both jets 12 miles south of the planned route. That put them out of the empty desert corridor and into the foothills, where an Iranian surveillance radar operator sat in a mountain pass scanning southeast. He'd driven his mobile unit out of Isfahan province ahead of the first week's strikes and set up in terrain the coalition hadn't prioritized. A move that required either exceptional initiative or exceptional paranoia. In Iran's military, the two were often indistinguishable. He couldn't shoot anything down. Didn't need to. He picked up the handset and gave Kerman what the scope showed. 2 fighter-sized returns, heading northeast, medium altitude, moving with the kind of purpose that meant someone's day was about to get significantly worse. That phone call, routed through a landline because 11 days of American strikes had turned Iranian military communications into the world's most expensive game of telephone, reached the IRGC garrison before the Ravens finished assembling their formation. While the report raced toward the airfield, Raven 2 discovered what 6 Gs had done to his targeting pod. The ATFLIR's gimbal you see here uses fiber optic gyroscopes to hold the infrared image steady, compensating for every movement the aircraft makes at 500 knots. 15 seconds at 6 Gs had precessed those gyroscopes off their reference. The image now jittered across the desert floor like trying to read a street sign through a bus windshield on a gravel road. He cycled the pod to standby. The jitter persisted. What Raven 2 didn't know, what nobody would confirm until maintenance debrief back on the Lincoln, was that the gyroscopes hadn't just precessed. The 6G snap had micro-fractured the fiber optic coupler feeding the reference laser. The pod wasn't drifting, it was guessing. Below 15,000 feet, the narrower field of view would compensate, with the target filling enough of the frame that the drift couldn't lose it. But 15,000 feet put him inside the engagement envelope of every short-range weapon the IRGC still had. The Tor hadn't just pushed them off route and into a surveillance radar. It had broken Raven 2's eyes and was about to force him into the altitude band where the ground defenses work best. At Kerman, a ground controller grabbed a field telephone mid-ring, listened for 4 seconds, and sprinted across the apron. Fighters inbound. Fuel trucks lurched clear of wheel chocks within seconds, a response time that would have impressed any Air Force on Earth, considering these crews had spent 11 days watching American precision munitions turn everything around them into modern art installations. Inside the cockpit, the flight engineer was already throwing switches on the overhead panel. APU start sequence, the beginning of the 4 to 5 minute spool that feeds compressed air to each of the 4 Soloviev turbofans at roughly 90 seconds per engine. If every step went right, the II-76 could be taxiing before the Americans arrived. 8,000 miles away at Creech Air Force Base, a Reaper sensor operator watched the scramble unfold in real time. The operator keyed the satellite link. Activity at the target. Engine start on the Heavy. When the Reaper's fuel state crossed bingo, 20 hours on station, longer than most people spend awake in a day, and the mission wasn't done, but the gas was. The sensor operator swept the apron one last time, time-stamped the frame, and turned south toward Djibouti. The screen went to empty desert. The replacement Reaper was 30 minutes out. The Ravens were 25. For the next 5 minutes, nobody on the American side could see Kerman airfield. The Ravens circling while fuel burned, and the II-76 crew raced through their checklist with nobody watching. But here's what the Americans couldn't see during those 5 blind minutes. The II-76 wasn't just spooling engines to evacuate. Ground crews were loading crates through the rear cargo ramp, long olive green cases that didn't match any standard supply manifest. Whatever the IRGC was trying to fly out of Kerman was worth more to them than the aircraft itself. The KAOC at Al Udeid, Combined Air Operations Center, air traffic control for the entire war, held the Ravens in orbit. No ISR coverage meant no weapons release authorization. Standard procedure that made perfect sense from a headquarters 900 miles away, where the coffee was hot and the ejection seats were theoretical, and made no sense at all from the cockpit of an aircraft burning fuel it couldn't spare. At Kerman, those same 5 minutes bought everything the garrison needed. The ground controller had Zu-23 gun trucks rolling from the motor pool before the first orbit completed. By minute 3, a Misagh-2 MANPAD team stood on the maintenance hangar roof with a launch tube on the operator's shoulder. The Misagh-2 is Iran's copy of the Chinese QW-1, which was itself China's copy of the Russian Igla, which makes the Misagh-2 a photocopy of a photocopy. And like any third-generation knockoff, it works just well enough to ruin your afternoon. The replacement Reaper checked in at 23,000 feet, an MQ-9 with a multispectral targeting system you see here, good enough to read a license plate from 4 miles up, controlled by a sensor operator in a trailer at Creech Air Force Base through what amounts to be a very expensive Xbox setup with a 600 millisecond satellite delay. The operator slewed the turret to the apron and the picture came in clean. All 3 confirmed. APU hot on the Heavy. Recommend immediate. Hold released. 16 minutes to target. The broken targeting pod and the 5-minute head start, both courtesy of the Tor M1, were waiting at the other end. Raven 1 swept the airfield from maximum ATFLIR range. The advanced targeting forward-looking infrared pod slung under the jet's belly you see here, essentially a thermal telescope that lets the pilot study a target from far enough away that the people on the ground can't shoot back. Lead's pod was clean, stable image, the kind of picture you designed a targeting system to produce. 2 pickup trucks with Zu-23 2 twin-barreled anti-aircraft guns sat at opposite ends of the runway, north and south. The Zu-23 fires 23mm rounds at 800 to 1,000 per minute per barrel. No radar, no signature on the RWR. The AK-47 of anti-aircraft guns. The gunner doesn't aim so much as just let it rip and hope for the best. 70 meters from the P-3F on the maintenance hangar roof, the MANPAD operator was clearly visible on the Reaper's infrared feed. Raven 1 could see the tube on his shoulder and the intercept geometry he'd already set up. Between the Zu-23s hosing the sky and the Misagh-2 waiting for the engine exhaust, Kerman's defenses formed an equation. Come in high and GPS jamming ruins your bomb. Come in low and the ground defenses ruin your day. The weapons they carried, GBU-38 JDAMs, 500-pound GPS-guided bombs, have a circular error probable of 5 meters under clean conditions. That puts the weapon on the fuselage. Under the Chinese-supplied GPS jamming concentrated around Iranian airfields, that circle swells to 25 meters. Against a building, it's still a hit. Against a parked aircraft, it's a crater on the taxiway, and a P-3 that limps to another field. The only way to tighten accuracy was to release lower. Cut the flight time from 90 seconds to 30. Less drift, tighter impact. But lower meant the Zu-23 envelope and the Misagh-2 ceiling. The Tor M1's 45 seconds, still compounding. Raven 1 rolled in first at 12,000 feet, 30-degree dive angle. ATFLIR locked on the P-3F. 3 seconds from pickle, the South Zu-23 opened up. No warning tone, just orange-white tracers punching through the air the Super Hornet was about to occupy while the gunner walked his lead angle across the dive path with the calm of someone who's been doing this for 11 straight days. 1,600 combined rounds per minute. He didn't need to be precise, he just needed to be close. Hard right into afterburner with the release window gone and the bomb still on the pylon. First run, scrubbed by a weapon system that cost less than a used sedan. On the rooftop, the MANPAD's operator read the brake, heading, altitude, the roll angle that told him where the jet would reappear if the pilot tried the same approach again. 11 days into this war, the Iranians still swinging were the ones who thought 2 moves ahead. Raven 2 couldn't afford to wait. The II-76 had been spooling for 25 minutes with possible engine activity on infrared, the one target that disappeared if they spent another 60 seconds on the Zu-23 problem. Raven 1 clawed back for altitude while his wingman committed on the heavy transport alone. 10,000 feet, 2,000 lower than the lead's aborted run, pushed into that altitude by a targeting pod the Tor had broken 40 minutes and 300 miles ago. The crosshairs lifted left past the II-76's wing route, overcorrected right, settled on the center line for a half second, and he mashed the pickle during that flicker of stability. The entire weapon solution riding on a momentary pause from a pod that hadn't worked right since the foothills. The GBU-38 dropped off the pylon with its tail kit deploying. 4 fins snapped into the airstream while the GPS receiver reached for the satellite constellation. The signal it found was already being contested. The jamming didn't hit like a wall. It crept in, noise flooding the GPS frequency the way static drowns a phone call, with the position solution drifting as interference buried the signal the bomb was steering by. Fins corrected by a fraction of a degree. The jamming shoved the other way. Fins countered. Every correction was a wager between the satellite signal the guidance could still see and the noise trying to bury it. 30 seconds of an invisible boxing match through 12,000 feet of contested spectrum. At 8,000 feet, the jamming found a resonance. The position solution jumped sideways by 11 meters. Fins slammed to maximum deflection, overcorrected, then found center again. Not through stillness, but through constant adjustment at every axis. A tightrope walk where the wire never stops moving and someone keeps flicking the lights on and off. From the rooftop, the Misagh-2 launched. The operator had tracked Raven 2's descent for 15 seconds, waiting for the rear quarter aspect where both F-414 engine nozzles were fully visible. The jet's missile warning receivers caught the plume at 5 o'clock low. Raven 2 broke into the missile and rotated its hottest aspect away from the seeker. ALE-47 dispensers fired MJU-53 flares, magnesium pellets burning at 2,000 degrees. Temporary suns designed to confuse the same thermal imaging brain that made the Misagh-2 dangerous. The seeker built its picture and faced a choice. The flares burned hotter, but the aircraft presented a larger thermal signature. The system needed 1 second to resolve the difference. The brake rotated the image faster than the focal plane array could refresh. Image smeared. The missile committed to the nearest flare and detonated 100 meters behind the aircraft. Alive. Flight suit probably ruined, and completely blind to his own bomb. The GBU-38 was still falling through the last 4,000 feet. Fins correcting through the Chinese interference with every remaining second of flight time. The Reapers saw the impact from 20,000 feet, forward of the wing route, fuselage splitting open, T-tails sagging sideways. The APU that had been feeding an engine start sequence for 25 minutes was now feeding fuel to a fire. The II-76 crew had raced through their checklists while the American jets orbited overhead, unable to shoot. The aircraft would never leave the apron. The MANPAD brake pushed Raven 2 south, straight across the Zu-23's firing arc at the south end of the runway. Same gun that had scrubbed Raven 1 30 seconds earlier. A weapon the Soviet Union designed in 1960, and Iran bought for the price of a decent pickup truck. The gunner already had his lead angle from the first engagement. He'd watched both passes, done the geometry in his head, and was now lining up for a better shot. Both barrels opened up and tracers climbed through the space the jet had occupied a half second before. At this range and closing speed, the gunner was putting rounds inside a volume the size of a house, and the Super Hornet had to thread through the gaps. Raven 2 jinked through the stream. Small corrections, just enough random motion to make the ballistic prediction wrong by the width of a fuselage. Rounds behind him, more fuel gone from a margin both pilots could count on one hand. Raven 1 came back from the northeast on a different line entirely. The first run taught him where the South Zu-23 sat. Raven 2's engagement showed him where the MANPAD operator was pointing. He put the maintenance hangar between his dive line and the rooftop, concrete and steel blocking the operator's sight line during the 3 seconds that mattered most. ATFLIR locked on the P-3, 51 years old. Lockheed built it in Burbank. Iranian crews learned to fly it at Moffett Field when the Shah was still in power. The airframe survived the revolution and the Iran-Iraq War on 23,000 man-hour overhauls, with parts Lockheed stopped selling when Carter was president. Buzzed the USS Essex in 2019, American-built and harassing the Navy that made it. Now it was time to return the favor. Pickle. GBU-38 into the same Chinese jamming. Interference shoved the signal sideways while the fins pushed back through 12,000 feet of contested air. Impact at the wing root. Fuel cells caught. Half a century of keeping an aircraft alive that its manufacturer had abandoned. Erased by a bomb built 15 miles from the factory that built the plane. Pull off for the last target. The North ZU-23 fired as he rolled in. Both barrels, tracers closer this time. The gunner adjusting from two previous passes he'd watched from the far end of the runway. Raven 1 chinked through the stream with the fuel state slashing amber on his HUD. The number meant the tanker over the Gulf of Orman wasn't optional anymore. It was the difference between landing on the Lincoln and taking a dip in the Arabian Sea. Every second over this airfield was a second he couldn't afford, and he still had one more bomb to put on one more aircraft. The C-130 filled the ATFLIR display, another American airframe Iran bought from Lockheed half a century ago. Then he pickled. The tail kit fought the same jamming and punched through the fuselage amidships, 3 for 3. If you enjoyed this video, watch our other video of B-2s pounding Iran into the Stone Age. Bye for now.